Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Comic Arts Workshop, um, where we get to talk to people who are in the industry, and we also once in a while get to hang out in real life. Not as much since the pandemic, but we'll try to do it more. I'm thinking of doing like a summer thing too. I know we do a holiday thing. We should do a summer thing. But anyways, tonight we have our guest, John Maher from Publishers Weekly. I think it's senior editor, right?
As of about a week and a half ago, it's news director.
Nice, news director. Okay. So we are going to start. I think everybody's heard my spiel before. We've been doing this 2017. We have guests at least once a month. Lately, it's been twice a month.
Oh,
Um,
by the way, today's Mardi Gras.
Thanks, Shar. That's
Happy
great.
Mardi Gras, everybody.
All right, so let's get going. So, John, let's first of all give him a nice round of applause for showing up. I know everybody's on mute, but John, where are you calling from?
I'm actually calling from the Publishers Weekly offices. My home is wonderful, but the lighting is it leaves quite a bit to be desired at night.
That
And we have these,
is
intense.
that's New York?
Yes, so we're
Okay.
based in the Flatiron District in New York. So I'm sitting in front of our archive, which is a pretty
That's
cool thing.
that's a
There's
real background. Holy crap.
That is a real background. There are about 152 years worth of magazines sitting behind me in bound volumes.
That's amazing. Well, lately we've been getting guests from out of state or out of the country, and so I was just wondering if you were also. But anyways, let's get started. I have some questions for you, and let's get started with that. So, I'd like for you to introduce yourself. Just tell us about your career path and what you're doing at Publishers Weekly.
Sure. As Ramon said, my name is John Maher. I'm the news director at Publishers Weekly, which is a 152-ish year old magazine that covers the book publishing business. I run our news department. So we are a trade magazine. We cover the ins and outs of the publishing and book business as a whole. That includes the comics business, although we do less in terms of coverage of periodical comics, more in terms of trade paperbacks, graphic novels. We do cover the comics industry, but as a rule, we typically stick, especially in our reviews, to publishing only reviews of graphic novels. My job involves working on the print magazine every week. We are still a weekly. We are still in print. God knows how, but here we are. We publish once a week. Hello, noise. And I oversee the news section in each issue, in addition to a fleet of newsletters on the web, where we do the vast majority of our reporting these days, as most publications do. We run a few newsletters. We have a flagship daily newsletter that covers the ins and outs of the publishing business. We also have a newsletter called The Fanatic, founded by the great Calvin Reed, my predecessor here in this position, to some extent. He was really the pioneer of PW's comics coverage. I'm a child with an oversized lollipop standing in very large footsteps. So I've been running the Fanatic for a couple of years now, and that's our primary outlet on the web for coverage of comics. Although we have a really sort of remarkable team here. There's Meg Lemke, our comics and graphic novels reviews editor, the wonderful Heidi McDonald, who I'm sure everybody knows, still does a lot of great reporting for us, and Calvin still runs a couple of things, does the podcast that we do every week, more to come, and runs a column for us. I think that's sort of the gist.
Why did this? What's the reasoning behind not covering periodical comics?
It's because we are a book business magazine. When we were founded, we were, oh God, it was like the were founded as like the publishing industry weekly trade circular or something. And if you look at some of the old copies in the back over there, you can see them. They're the brown ones as opposed to the black ones. Um, we really covered the ins and outs of the trade book publishing industry in particular. Some of the early issues are really cool. When you look through them, you see advertisements from like ink companies and people who built printer parts in the 1870s. So when our comics coverage started, it was really Calvin Reed's work. He came from an art background, art and jazz, and he was really interested in comics. And when he got started here in I believe it was the 80s, he was really foundational in developing our comics coverage. And this was at a time when the book business was was really getting started in graphic novels, when the trade publishing book business realized that there was money to be made, that there was an audience there, and they started branching more and more into comics that we would sort of consider to be more artsy comics. Your Scott McClouds and your Craig Thompsons and that kind of side of thing. So when that coverage started,
One second.
error. When that coverage started, it was really dedicated to the book business side of things. And while we do cover what happens at the big at the major publishers of periodical comics, we tend to focus specifically on the graphic novel side of things, because our coverage tends to lean toward industry coverage of book publishers, bookstores, libraries, and honestly, the periodical side is just such a different business that to expand into covering that on the regular as well, almost just our purview. It's almost too big, too much to cover with our team. So I think that's sort of most of the reason why we've stuck in the book comic in the graphic novel and book side of things.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it is a completely different business model, a completely different distribution system.
Yeah. The number of
would-
times I have had to try to explain to people, like I would say every time I mention the direct market in a piece, or a reporter mentions the direct market in the piece, my managing editor is like, can you give me one sentence to explain this to our audience? And I'm always kind of like, no, it's too complicated to sum up so quickly.
I can believe it. I can believe it. And the funny thing is that, you know, graphic novels as a medium in the traditional publishing industry is rarely recent in the last 20 years, right?
Yeah,
So
a little bit longer, but yes, I think the publishing, the trade book publishing industry's interest in comics really, I think, just started in the late 80s, early 90s. And over the past couple of decades, you've really seen a boom, especially on the middle grade side, in comics for young readers. But yeah, it's a fairly recent adaptation for the book business.
why would you say middle grade is the
I
most
think
popular?
I would say this is sort of I mean, I could probably pull up the numbers if you wanted me to, but I think like when you think about Scholastic and Graphics and First Second and these publishing houses that are just putting out terrific middle grade, it sells really well. And there's all kinds of questions about literacy and getting young readers interested in reading, and how the juxtaposition of image and text works so well. And it's like
Yeah.
it sounds like, do you remember the World Cup with the vuvuzelas? This is like what I'm hearing in the, like anyway, which is not to say that there isn't some really terrific adult graphic novel representation in the business. I mean, there absolutely is. But I do think that middle grade has been a particularly strong category for trade publishers in comics.
Now, before you took this position, did you have a specific interest in graphic novels?
I did. So it's funny. I know you in the questions you
I
sent.
love cocaine. Cocaine.
Okay.
This is becoming a full-time job.
in
We are being trolled here.
we
Yeah.
sure. That's okay.
And you can't figure out who this is.
We can play along. As long as nothing too terribly obscene comes on the screen, I'm sure we'll manage.
Yeah.
So when I started in the business as a bookseller. I worked at Barnes & Noble for about a year and a half. This was in 2012. And I ended up moving into a job at a local newspaper on Long Island. I worked there for a couple of years. And I worked after that at a fleet of editorial websites called the Book Report Network, which for a long time had a website called graphicnovelreporter.com, which I ran for about a year and a half. And I love to read. I love to read across the board. My
I got an idea. There you go. Instead of removing them, I put them in the waiting room. Hopefully
Well-
that works better.
we'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. So keep going. Sorry.
So I always sort of read pretty broadly across the board, and when I started working at graphicnovelreporter.com, I was actually hired in advertising and promotions. I wasn't hired in editorial. But they really needed someone to run that website, and I had a decent amount of knowledge. When I was a kid,
It didn't work better. It did.
my folks bought me lots of Calvin Hobbes collections when I was a kid, and I think that was probably where I really got started reading comic strips. And as I got older, I think I ended up befriending folks who were really into comics. I was an animation geek and have been for quite a long time. I ran a website about animation for a while. I reported for Vulture and Polygon and a couple of other places about animation. And so there's a lot of overlap there, obviously. I grew up in a really great time for comics and for superhero adaptations in animation. And so I think that's probably where I got my start, watching Batman, the animated series as a kid. And then saying, hey, maybe I should check out the comics, and then getting into the comics and starting to get interested in DC and realizing, which artists I liked, and starting to look into their work, and then branching into the work
Chrissy Wood.
branching into the work that they did outside of superhero comics, and starting to
Let's
really
pause
look-
for a second. I'm going to create a new Zoom room, and then I'll text everybody while that guy's not here. Okay? If just
All
give
right,
me a
so-
second,
Sounds good.
because this is getting
Yes, it
ridiculous.
has.
Okay, so we were talking about what sparked your interest in comics. Let's go to the next question. What trends do you see in publishing that comic creators should pay attention to?
So that's a good question, and I'm going to answer it a little slant. And by that I mean I'm in my day job I focus on lots of parts of the business, and it's not just the graphic novel side of things, but also the traditional book publishing side of things. And some of the trends that we're seeing right now, and I don't think this will be terribly surprising to people in the book publishing business in particular. The fiction is these days very feel good. I don't think anybody will be terribly surprised by the idea that people would like to read things that are not terribly depressing right now, because if you want to be depressed, you can just, turn on your New York Times, updates and be depressed on a regular basis that dysregulates your your everyday functions. People are really looking for very feel good fiction right now, and on the nonfiction side, people are kind of looking into self-help. And so there obviously is like some overlap, but not a lot of overlap in terms of book publishing and graphic novels. But I do think that work that is inspiring is very in right now, even, and also work that is diverting. In the book publishing business, we've seen for a few years that the romantasy trend has been inescapable. Lots of sexy dragons and such. This is a space that has continued to do well, and I'm kind of almost surprised that there hasn't been a huge comics turn in that direction. In terms of nonfiction and in the book publishing side of things, inspirational books and self-help books have been really big, and we've seen a couple of really interesting graphic novels, and please don't ask me to name them because, to be honest, at the moment my brain is Swiss cheese. But we've seen some really cool graphic novels about mental health, both like graphic novels and graphic memoir. And I think that that is a space that we should be watching in the coming months and years, because one of the really beautiful things about comics is their immediacy, right? You get with the juxtaposition of sequential images and text, it has a really visceral effect on the reader in a way that that prose doesn't always. And so I think we're going to see some really, really cool stuff in the next couple of years. And I'm really
did you
curious
s-
to see how it
did you
evolves.
say that there are self-help graphic novels?
No, not that I know of, but I'd be really curious to see if that trend in the book publishing side of things sort of like moves into comics. I don't think it will be as strictly self-help. I think comics is not necessarily the format for that. Although you do see some stuff that you could see potentially being applicable. I'm thinking of all of these, like, I'm thinking of food comics in particular, actually, graphic cookbooks. I could see a graphic self-help trend being a possibility. But I'm thinking more actually on the comic side of really like honest interrogations of mental health. The last book that I read was the last comic that I read was Zoe Thorogood's It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth. And that sort of there's so much intimacy in that comic, in part because it is a semi-fictionalized interrogation of her own mental health struggles and experiences in the business and just being a person. And I think that's a really cool thing I'm pretty sure that is a graphic novel, not a graphic memoir, but it has this kind of overlap similar to, in the fiction world, what's called autofiction, fiction that is rooted in biography and in the self. And I think comics is really well suited for that form because it's so visual, because there's so many possibilities for exploring an internal landscape via visuals that you don't have necessarily in prose.
So what are some things that comic creators, graphic novelists can learn from traditional publishing and traditional authors?
That is a great question. So the business has been changing so much that I'm gonna find it maybe hard to find an answer to this question. I think one of the trends that we've seen as I'm not sure, because I think in some ways comics creators have always found routes to do some of the same sort of pioneering things that authors of prose works have been doing recently as well. And I'm thinking especially of the possibility of self-publishing with the internet, and the way that that allows you to sort of build an audience, the horrible term platform, and really leverage that into attention from the business. And I think comics creators are doing a fantastic job on that, and not just in the webtoon and webcomic space. There are a lot of parallels between these two businesses. Zines have always existed, and I think in some ways, publishing has learned from, like traditional publishing has learned from comics creators how to really leverage zines and self-publishing in order to find an audience who's interested in work that could be more cutting edge, and develop it into an audience that you can sort of bring to a traditional publishing house and say, hey, if you like my art, guess what? So do 10,000 other people. Just check the internet. And I think that the more possibilities that are open to us with the new technology that we have, the more we're going to see a lot of that. In the traditional book publishing side of things, it's become a huge trend to see major publishers, like really big houses, basically have editors trawling Amazon and looking for self-published work that has a lot of attention, and saying, we want to give these people traditional publishing deals because we've got the distribution and we've got, our marketing and publicity and sales teams, they're built in, and they've got the product. They can bring it right over here and we can just fit it right into our model. I personally am really excited to see how that continues to evolve in the comic space. I think we're seeing a lot of it in webtoons and webcomics, and I don't think I'm surprising anybody here by saying that, there are literally now imprints at major publishing houses, at major traditional book publishing houses, dedicated entirely to printing webcomics as books. I'm thinking of Inklore at Random House. That's like just off the top of my head. And so I do think like the like self-publishing is almost like a career starter is a really big thing and will continue to be big as we move along in the 2020s.
Got it. Okay. Now, along the same lines, how can creators leverage Publishers Weekly and similar resources in their work?
So there are a couple of different ways that they can do that. So speaking from my particular expertise, I cover the book publishing business as a news reporter. So it's always funny trying to explain this to people. They ask like what I do, and they're like, do you read a lot of books? Do you write a lot about books? I don't actually. I write about the publishers. I write about the booksellers. I write about the librarians. I write about and report on what's happening at libraries in this country right now. I write about trends in publishing and book selling. And I think what's always good about reading the trades in whatever business you're in, whether it's books or comics or Hollywood, is that you get a sense of what is coming out and what people are interested in and what's being received well. On the news side, you can read our work and get an idea of like which comics are selling well, which publishing houses are doing particularly well, which publishing houses are struggling, what the models are for those publishers that give you sort of an idea of why they might be struggling in this environment. So to read our news coverage is to sort of get an idea of how the companies that you might bring your graphic novel to and say, hey, I would like to publish with you, what they're actually up to, what kind of things they're publishing. On the reviews side, you get to actually see how people are receiving the comics that are published, not just what the companies are doing, but how our reviewers are perceiving the comics that are coming out. And I think from a sort of reconnaissance standpoint, we provide a fairly effective service there. I also think that in terms of a publicity standpoint, obviously it's great to know a reporter or a critic who you can email and say, hey, I just launched a new publishing company, or hey, I just published this graphic novel and I'm looking to crowdfund it, or maybe you'll want to take a look. Hi, I'm the news editor. Feel free to send me what you'd like. It's great for me because it means that I get the chance to see what's really coming out of that side of the business, and it's great for them because once you have a relationship with a reporter or a writer or an editor, you maintain it, like you sort of get a main line um into the media coverage of the business that you're in, and that can be advantageous in a couple of ways. For one, covering your work. For another, just being able to say, hey, I saw this thing that you wrote. Can you explain a little bit more to me about why you think something is the way it is? And we're pretty approachable. I'm not Don Lemon. It's like, it's pretty easy to reach me. You don't have to go through 3 or 4 different, sorry, we got an ambulance over here. This is 6th Avenue. One sec, I'm gonna mute.
And I think Jill is nearby. I think she's on 27th.
Hello, neighbor.
The same ambulance.
Same ambulance.
Yep.
Yeah. So so I think that's great to know, Glenn. Thank you. So I think that's a huge piece of it is knowing that, for instance, Publishers Weekly accepts submissions for book reviews. We have a whole system called Galley Tracker. You can look it up. You can Google it. And you can create an account and submit your book for review. This is not a guarantee of review, but it is a guarantee that someone at this company will look and decide whether or not to review that book. That I think would be fairly materially helpful for comics creators to know.
Now, I have a self-published graphic novel, and I actually went through Book Life.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the relationship between Book Life and Publishers Weekly?
Book Life is our self-publishing focused website. So Book Life is another option. PW's been around since long before self-publishing was really an industry of its own. And so when we started to try to figure out how we were going to cover all of the self-published books, because look, let's be real, we're in print media in 2025. We are not rolling in money. So it's not like we have so many staffers that we can just like cover every book. We really can't. We do everything we can. We publish 6,000 book reviews a year, but I don't think anybody here thinks that there's only 6,000 books published every year. So when we decided to launch Book Life, which was a few years ago, during my tenure, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we decided that we wanted a separate part of the business in order to allow us to do both, to cover traditionally published books and graphic novels, and also to be able to review and cover self-published graphic novels. So Book Life is an official PW brand. We have a supplement in our magazine every, I think, 2 weeks, where we run reviews, Book Life reviews at the back of the magazine. So that is an option. So let's say you've submitted your book for review consideration at Publishers Weekly, and we say, we're sorry, but we're not going to review the book. You can then go to Book Life and say, hello, I would like you to review my book. And because it's a paid service, you're guaranteed a review. You're not guaranteed to read a review you'll be happy about, but they are honest. They are real reviews. But they are paid. They're a service. So that's the big difference.
So just to ease my imposter syndrome, I actually got a very good review from Book Life.
They meant it.
So you think they really meant it? It's
They
not
really
it's
meant
just
it.
not me paying for a fluffy review.
There have been books submitted to Book Life that have been reviewed poorly, and the authors have been given the option to either publish or not, to either have the review published or not have it published.
Got it.
Um,
Okay.
So yes, you got a real review, I promise.
Okay, got it. So at this point, I'd like to open up to the audience if anybody has any questions. And if not, I will definitely have a few more of my own. So does anybody want to ask a question?
Oh, I have a question.
Go ahead, Char.
You plan to use generative AI in your works, or are you? What do you? Or are you gonna stick with human creativity for now?
That's a great, I mean, that's a great question because we're in a pretty terrifying time. Um, we do not publish reviews or articles written by AI. We our company is certainly as interested as any company right now in the evolution of that form. And speaking from the perspective of someone who reports on the business side of the book business, obviously we're very interested in how it is affecting book publishers and graphic novel publishers. Submissions that are from AI creators that are positioned as being created by humans, even though they are not. Contracts, book contracts. What are the rights? What is the copy? Are these things copyrightable? Why? How? In what form? These are all like huge questions for the business and existential ones, I think. But in terms of our daily workflow, I mean, I've tried some of these programs just to sort of get an idea, and I have found them useful in pretty much one circumstance only, and that is in creating job postings. They're really good for mindless template business crap. They are not particularly good at creating. And while I am sure we are going to see that change over the course of the next, however many years that this technology proliferates, we value books written by people and graphic novels written by people. And I think it's a matter of trust from a journalistic perspective that that when you are reading our critics' opinions of your books, or you're reading our reporting on a publishing company's work, that that a person wrote it and that a person actually vetted it, and that is certainly where we are still.
Thanks for the question, Char. Thanks for the great answer. Does anybody else have any questions? Greg, go ahead.
Where do you see the trend going with online comics and stuff like that? It seems like you're reaching out to substantial creators in order to get the print copy. But what about the other IP rights? Like, are you trying to hold on to if they compete against Hollywood for getting the rights to create an short anime short or a full feature live
Sorry,
action type?
I can't quite parse the question, like what my role is in that, or
No, I just wondering how you see the trend from you're dealing with the publishers and that what they're trying to do to survive that type of situation.
Yeah, I think it's such a moving target.
Mhm.
I think the publishing industry itself is really sort of trying to figure this out as well. In terms of workflow, I think a lot of publishers are incorporating some of these tools because, yeah, it's an expensive business, and being able to rely on AI for some of the back office stuff helps, helps a business that, like, frankly just can't afford the number of assistants that it used to be able to afford.
Yeah.
But IP is such a moving target. And when you look at something like Hollywood, right, where you had the writers' strikes, publishing doesn't really have that. Like, there's the Authors Guild, which is a wonderful resource for authors, and they sort of operate almost like, but not quite like a union. But because there's really no authors union to say, to basically say, here is a standard contract. Any author in our union, here are the protections for their IP with regards to AI, adaptation or theft, copyright violation. Because there is none, this stuff is being done like on a moment to moment, on a case to case basis. And obviously different agencies, the larger ones in particular, are developing their own contract language. The major publishers are developing their own contract language. But it feels like, and partially this is just my ignorance, frankly. Like, it's moving so fast, almost like it's hard to keep track of how it's changing. These conversations are ones that are I'm about to go to the London Book Fair next week, and there's probably like 12 different panels on AI, contracts, copyright, specifically because we're all kind of asking this question. And there are certainly advocacy groups that are working on behalf of publishers and authors, especially in the space of copyright, to try to really strengthen these things. But if you think about what a contract looks like, right? Like look at let's take an example. Let's say let me think of a good one. I'm drawing a blank. But let's say you published a graphic novel in 1998, and you had very strong copyright language that said, here, and rights language, and it said, here are the rights that you have. In signing this contract, you give this publisher X, Y, and Z. They have the right to the work itself in print, and they have the right to the audio. And you didn't necessarily sign that contract didn't stipulate that you were also signing over the adaptation rights. That meant that those rights stayed with you, but that's because they were able to enumerate that they were able to illustrate that in a contract, right? Because they knew those rights existed. So there was probably a clause in this contract that's, and look, I'm not a lawyer, so but like there was probably a clause in this contract that said and the author shall retain XYZ rights, including but not limited to yada yada yada. If that but not limited to phrase wasn't in that contract, who knows with AI? Like a contract from 1998 doesn't necessarily stipulate that the text of this book cannot be ripped by an AI bot, because who knew that was even a possibility? And so, now you're starting to see contracts that specifically say that the author retains rights, that the copyright does not apply to AI taking that text without permission, and that it has to go through a specific, and there are some publishing companies that are now inking contracts. HarperCollins did a major one last year that basically said, certain works, the authors can opt in and get a one-time payment that will effectively allow limited use of their text for training AI models. So we are starting to see this stuff develop, but we're still in the hairy early days. It's all kind of evolving day by day. I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure if it did.
Well, yeah, like I said, I just wanted to see where you were going to go with it, because it's a fastly changing field.
It makes you wonder if the dust will ever settle, because technology is always changing, right?
Well, that is the trick, right? Like once one thing is inked and you know what's going on, and you have finally wrap your head around it, suddenly it's like, okay, but what about this specific manifestation of it? It really is kind of spooky. And in graphic novels, there's a whole other aspect to it, which is the visuals. You know, it's
Mhm.
not just the text, it's not just the prose. There is the style,
Yeah.
you know, the specific artistic style of these creators whose work has been in many cases illegally used to train visual AI models. So it's a huge question.
You know, there's a question that's been puzzling me, and not specifically for you, but I should actually ask the audience here. And just a show of hands, a yes or no. I'm just my own edification. If there was an AI that lets you scrub your own work and you could prompt it to draw in your style and you take credit for it, would you take advantage of it? Meaning, say you have this AI and AI tell the AI, learn how to draw like me, Jill Pratson. And then you tell it, okay, now create a story about this and this. And so it'll produce a story all in Jill Pratson's style, prompted by Jill Pratson. Would you take advantage of an AI tool like that? So show of hands, yes, if you would.
Eh, what an awful question. How could you?
I want
Probably not.
AI to scrub. I want AI to scrub my dishes. I don't want AI to write and draw for me. I want it to mop my floor. I mean, good God.
I've been thinking about this a lot too. I was a 90s kid. I grew up watching reruns of all the great cartoons, and where the hell is the Jetsons? I want Jetsons.
Yeah.
Like give me the Jetsons or jettison it, all of it. Like, because I truly, like, you know, I've been thinking about this a lot. If the whole purpose of this is to make our lives easier and not harder, if the whole purpose of it is to take away the odiousness of certain tasks, then I want an AI where I can press a button and it looks through all of my emails and all of the emails of a CEO at a publishing company that I need to go to lunch with. And it looks at both of our Outlook calendars, finds a date, finds the history of all the places we like to go to lunch, schedules a lunch for us, puts it on our calendar. You know how much time that takes? Like, that's what I want. I don't want something that writes my stories for me, because that's why I got into the business. I don't like sending emails. I like reporting. And I think that I'm sure that is a feeling, and that's sort of exactly what you just said. Like, give me something that, puts away my dishes after the dishwasher cleans them. Don't give me something that, that takes away the time that I want to spend on drawing, because drawing is a joy for me. It's not a task.
If I may, I think all of those things are coming. I spent 2.5 hours on FaceTime with my son while he showed me what he's doing in writing AI, and the things we can do, basically the equivalent of washing our dishes. It's in there once we learn how to ask them to do it. My concern is when I move into the graphic novel and I present the graphic novel and, it gets picked up and it starts running, the next one, they're going to want it faster. Publishing is going to need it faster. And then I'm going to turn to Ramon and go, yeah, I think I want that AI to do some of the dirty work in creating my stuff. So maybe it is something we're going to start using. And I hate the way that sounds.
You know, Jill, I'm with you because I like drawing, but it takes forever.
Yeah.
So, but if I had complete control over and it was my style exclusively, nobody else could use it, then there's a big gray area there for me.
Yeah, and like John, if you were into animation, so in the beginning, animation, I did it old style where we did every little drawing, all the in-betweens and everything, right? Move ahead to now, nobody does it like that. So the computer can scan my thing and it can turn it 360 degrees and it can make it do whatever. So then I can just draw a little here and a little there. So it should be able to do the work for us.
Yeah, but right now, if we were to use AI for our artwork, publishers probably wouldn't touch us, no matter what the justification or amount that we're using. So
Yeah.
Anyways, little segue there, but who has, Greg, you have another question?
Yeah, follow up. You mentioned the Jetsons, and that brings up something for me. I think you were talking about looking at the Jetsons to create news stories. But the thing is, a lot of this stuff has been orphaned. It's not available. The creator is dead, and the publisher may be dead too. And I'm just wondering what happens to all this orphaned IP, and can it be resurrected?
This is such a thorny question. Because, you know, I've been reporting on this business for quite some time, and the deep seated conflict between copyright hawks and the for a better word, copy leftists.
Yeah.
You know, it can get really intense. I mean, how we define, for instance, book piracy is fascinating. Because if you ask certain groups, and I'm thinking specifically of the Association of American Publishers, whose CEO is the former Register of Copyright of the United States government, you know, they're very, very hawkish on copyright, and you know, the decision at a federal court fairly recently, I think it was last year, about this practice, and this is like way too complicated. We won't get into this, but this practice called controlled digital lending, which was sort of it was a proposed term. It's a term that proposes effectively that if you have a scanned copy of a book and you lend it as if you are lending a library book. So like, you know, let's say I have a copy of, all right, the first, you know, the like Scientific Progress Goes Boink, the Calvin and Hobbes comic collection from Bill Watterson. If I were a library and I owned 3 copies of that, I could loan it. If I am a digital library and I have owned 3 copies of it and I have scanned it 3 times and I am loaning the scanned PDF, is that a copyright violation? If I'm only loaning it 3 times the number of times I purchased this book. Obviously, the copyright hawks say yes, that's a copyright violation. But the Internet Archive, one of the main arguments that they made was like so many of the books that they loaned are in the exact circumstance that you are talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about cookbooks from 1958. Where the rights have reverted to the author, who is dead, who has no estate, and nobody can find their, nobody can find their family, or you know, some academic study of the effect of soap on salamanders from, you know, that some biologist is specifically looking for and can't find because it's been out of print for 60 years, but they found a copy on the Internet Archive because they couldn't, you know, nobody, it hasn't been in print. They don't know who the publisher is. The publishing house doesn't exist, et cetera, et cetera. It's a really huge question. And I don't really know the answer to like, how do we solve the problem? What, you know, what is the moral, you know, what is the better moral good here? I think, you know, from my, and this is, you know, this does not represent the opinions of my employer, yada, yada. But like, you know, from my personal perspective, like the reason I am a journalist and the reason that I'm a journalist that covers book publishing and is because knowledge is good and people should have it. So, you know, from my perspective, you know, yeah, I want people to be able to access those things. Do I want authors and creators to lose the ability to make money on their work in a system in which it is they are dependent upon it for their living because of a similar tactic? No, I mean, of course not. So it's really, it's a huge question. And while we have a federal court's answer for it right now, I don't think it's going to go away.
Just one quick follow-up, Ramon. Your cookbook example, I'm just wondering, okay, the publisher's gone, the author's gone and everything. So somebody finds a copy somewhere at a used bookstore or something, copies it, maybe scans it and does OCR or whatever, and just publishes it, maybe not for profit, maybe for profit, who would sue them?
It's a great question. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
answer obviously is like if there is any party out there that exists that could potentially have a rights argument, they might do that.
Yeah.
But I also think, and this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of advocates for, copy leftists would
Yeah.
be very frustrated with that decision, is like, how in the in that specific case, who exactly is it harming to share that work?
Yeah.
Now, if I'm going out and I am scanning copies of a graphic novel by a living artist whose book is, like that's a different story. Or if I'm scanning copies of a graphic novel by a dead artist whose family benefits from the IP, like, yeah, that's theft. And
Mhm.
and I think we can all probably kind of to some extent agree that like that is not good for creators. But if you're, if your work is you're a graphic historian and you want to be able to reproduce a panel from I don't know, uh like a Winsor McKay comic that has gone out of print, but and we can't find the rights to it, but it hasn't gone into the public domain yet, like, and you want to reproduce it in order to illustrate your point in your history, and you do that and you get sued by, like, it's a mess. But in certain cases, like, it is necessary for a creative to be able to do that. So it's a thorny question.
Okay, thank you. I won't ask any more questions. Right?
Please do. I love a copyright talk. I
You
can't
know
say,
what?
but it's
This
fun.
this guy has me thinking that maybe we should invite a copyright lawyer back in here, or a lawyer, and just ask all these kinds of questions. Maybe Gamal, we can get Gamal to come back. So we'll see. But anyways, we're at the 1 hour mark, even though we got interrupted. I'd like to give anybody else one more chance for a question.
I'm
No?
formulating something. I just want to say that I spent a lot of time looking at Publishers Weekly because I was looking into children's books in the beginning, and I got so overwhelmed because you guys have so much material. And I still get like newsletters and things like that and follow some of it. But sometimes it's just really overwhelming. There's not really a question there. It's that you guys do great work and you do a lot of it. And as creators, sometimes it's almost too much to bear.
I mean, sometimes it's too much to bear for us. The amount of news that there is to cover is just, it's staggering, and let alone the reviews. I mean, my colleagues in the reviews section make agonizing choices, and I do not use that term lightly. I am talking about when you need, when you have to choose which 60 whatever, like which 20 graphic novels you are going to cover in a week, and there are 180 graphic novels published that week. There are going to be situations where, one of your reviewers says, like, this is it's not a masterpiece, but it's really worth a review. It's great. Like, we should, this is a really cool thing. And you have to say, I don't have the budget, or I don't have the time, or, I really, like, it's tough. And so thank you for recognizing it, because I do think there are circumstances where that is absolutely true. There is, and I think it's one of the most frustrating things about AI in particular right now. There is too much content made by people, let alone too much content made by bots that have stolen concepts and styles and ideas from people via, like, trawling the internet, and are now trying to position themselves as authors. Like, yeah, there's a lot out there.
Didn't Calvin leave you like special keys or something? Because he's a monster. He must have tricks on how to navigate.
I am so grateful for Calvin. And when that man retired, he retired. He's
He's
living the
not-
life,
Travel.
He's not doing the podcast anymore.
He's still doing the podcast. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
I was
actually,
like, wow.
it's very funny because there was one time where I was like, Calvin, I really need your help. I love the comics business, but I am not the expert. When I came on at PW, I had done graphic novel work and graphic novel coverage. And when I got here, it was like, that's Calvin's beat. Like, what you're trying to step in his shoes, like, no way. And so, for the past 10 years, like Calvin covered it. And so every once in a while, I'll go to Calvin and be like, look, this is like a really complex thing. I would really love your perspective. And he'll always chat with me. We'll grab a beer. He'll give me advice. But, one day he looked at me and he just said, I've had enough deadlines in my life. I never need a deadline again. And it's like, okay, like I 35 years in as a reporter, there's no part of me that's gonna give you shit for that. Like, no way. Can't blame him.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the very last question. We're gonna call it a night. I'm sure you guys want to watch the Trump thing.
Oh God, is there another one?
I think he's giving some kind of press conference at 9 o'clock
Okay.
about the tariff thing. But anyways, let me ask you this. Now you are coming. I know you cover traditional book publishing, but from your perspective, and from what you know about traditional book publishing business, how can the direct market industry be improved?
Okay, I will try. I am no expert. So one of the really interesting things about the difference in distribution between periodicals, like in the direct market, and graphic novels is that book publishing is one of the only industries, I really can't think of another, that has a blanket return policy where if a bookstore buys books and they do not sell them, they can return them to the publisher. It is, if you really think about it, absolutely ridiculous. Like, as a concept, it is almost hard to wrap your head around how that actually affects publishers. The direct market doesn't do that. You buy a floppy comic, you've bought it. If you don't sell it, you sit on it. I think that juxtaposition is, how do I put this? The book publishing industry, like trade books and trade booksellers, the advantage to some extent is on the side of the retailers, because if they can't sell the book, they can send it back to the publisher for a refund. They can return the books. The comic shops, they can't do that. And so the burden, the bigger financial burden is on the retailers. I think if you are the kind of person who says, retail is the front line of the business and we need to find ways to protect brick and mortar stores and protect small businesses, that is something you might want to look at. We are talking about, however, 50 years of precedent? Those things don't get rolled back easily. I will say that I think it is to, and I'm gonna sound like a classic capitalist here, and that is not what I am as a person, but I as a business reporter, you've got to call it like you see it in the system that exists. And the system that exists is ostensibly a free market. I think it would be best to have more distributors. Distribution is, and I am not telling anybody here anything they don't know. The diamond situation is really scary for a lot of people. And you can say all you want about Lunar, they're great. They're picking up some really cool accounts, but they have specifically said, we want to continue to do what we do well, and that means we can't scale aggressively. Because if we scale aggressively, at some point, we will be unable to do what we do well for our accounts because we'll be taking on too much to do. Distribution is so difficult. It's so complicated. Things get lost. Drivers fall asleep at the wheel. Paper doesn't come in time. Like there's like so many pieces of that puzzle. And I think, and we're seeing it in the book publishing side too. When the Diamond bankruptcy news came, I got on the phone with my old boss, Jim Milliot, who was the editorial director at PW for the past 20 odd years. And he's a real nitty gritty numbers guy. He was always fascinated by how, like, not just the book publishing side, but like how distribution worked, how printing worked, how the supply chain worked. And when I called him, he was like, it's a nightmare. And it's a nightmare that we've seen in book publishing too. Last year, small press distribution, which was it was exactly what it sounds like. It distributed books for small presses, literary presses, poetry presses, the kind of presses that are on a shoestring budget, like your edgy, artsy comics publishers. Very similar situation. Diamond was way bigger, but Diamond is one of those distributors that would distribute really small accounts. Penguin Random House has been getting into the direct market, but they're not going to publish. They're not going to distribute for like houses that put out 4 graphic novels a year. They can't. It's not worth it for them. And so the more folks that get into distribution for those kinds of publishers, the stronger the direct market I think will be, because the stronger that the business will be in general, because that means that you're going to get a more diverse field of graphic novels and periodicals, because you will have small publishers that have access to the stores. And if they don't have access to the comic shops via a distributor, if they can't find a distributor to take it on, you're going to see the houses that already have the money, that already have the relationships, dominating even more than they already do. And it's not good for business. I mean, it's good for DC, but it's not good for practically anyone else.
You're muted.
You're
Sorry about
muted,
that.
Rick.
Yeah, my wife is like in conversation. I don't know why she's doing it now. But anyways, that was a great way to end the session. This has been a really great conversation all around. I was just thinking that, I sometimes go on other people's podcasts and we have less banter, but I think that our conversations are much more stimulating or educational. So anyways, enough about that. So I just want to announce that where is that link? Your events. So so we are having Warren Bernard on March 18th. He is the organizer of SPX,
Awesome.
where you and I met. And then we have Sarah Litt, who is an editor at large at Ahoy Comics, on April 5th. And to the second half of April, we're going to have Jim Salicrup, who was the founder of Paper Cuts. Is it Paper Cuts? And he was also a veteran DC editor. So anyway, thank you all for coming out. John, thanks again. Just give him a nice round of applause.
That is
Sorry.
rarefied company. I'm, I'm just honored to be invited as all of the, to be nominated as the. Thank
Yes,
you. It was a great chat.
In about a week, I'll put up the link to the video, and I guess that's it. But thank you again, and hopefully I'll see you around, the Comic Con and stuff like that. And oh, one more thing. Do you have any social media that people can follow you on?
I got offline. I needed the break.
Okay, got it. Okay.
All right.
I'm on LinkedIn. Jill found me.
Okay.
There you go.
You can find me there. I don't use it very much, but feel free to shoot me a line. My email at Publishers Weekly is very simple. It's my first initial and my last name at publishersweekly.com. Feel free to shoot me a line if you have any questions. Like I said, my expertise in comics is limited, but I'm obviously happy to weigh in with what I know. And if I don't know the answer, Heidi McDonald, Calvin Reed, Meg Lemke, not very far away. So happy to get the real experts in.
Awesome.
John, just as a point, showing my age, when I was a kid, comic books did have remainders, and I'd see the guys go in and tear the covers off.
That's
Um,
heartbreaking. Like,
Yeah,
just,
but that was little spiral stands in the liquor store and stuff like that. I don't know if it was every week or every month, but they used to come by and do that.
You know, I almost feel like it's worth comic books being ripped apart like that if it gives children more access to the comics. Because right now you can only get direct market comics from comic book shops. You know,
Yeah.
whereas back then you could get it at the corner, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Or the liquor
anyways,
where all the kids were hanging out at the
yeah,
liquor.
there you go, liquor store. That's where I got my comics, at the liquor
Yeah,
store.
and they were only 10 cents when I was
At the what are the head shops? Head shops, is what they call it? Head
Shops.
shops, yeah, yeah. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Have a nice evening, and I will
We'll
see you
see.
again
Thanks, John.
at the next call.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
thank
I
you
need to-
all for having me. Ramon, thank you.
Sure,
Great.
thank you
everyone.
very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.